I've kept my mouth shut for 2 years, because who's going to believe a hiker who saw Bigfoot? But after what happened during that landslide storm, I can't keep quiet anymore. I still hike these same Blue Ridge trails, still live alone near the forest. But everything changed after that night. Everything. Let me back up and tell you how this whole thing started. 2 years ago, I was burnt out, completely fried. My job had sucked every ounce of energy from me, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt anything, really. So I did what I always do when life gets too loud. I planned a solo trek through the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. 5 days, just me and the wilderness. I chose a trail I'd never hiked before. Looking back now, that decision probably saved my life, though at the time, I didn't know I was walking straight into something impossible. The trail was called Raven's Notch, and it was barely maintained. I'd found it on an old forum where someone mentioned it was quiet and off the beaten path. That's exactly what I wanted. No crowds, no noise, just silence. The trailhead was nearly invisible, overgrown with kudzu and mountain laurel. My phone showed 1 bar of service, then nothing. I should have noticed how quiet it was. No birds, no squirrels, just the sound of my boots on dead leaves. But I was too focused on escaping my own head to pay attention to what the forest was trying to tell me. The first day passed without incident. I hiked about 8 miles, set up camp near a creek, ate my freeze-dried dinner, and slept like the dead. It felt good to be away from everything. Away from emails, expectations, the constant hum of being connected. But the second day, that's when things started feeling off. I woke up early, around 6, and packed up my tent. The forest was still unnaturally quiet, but I told myself it was just the elevation, or the time of year. Maybe the animals migrated differently here. I didn't know. I wasn't a wildlife expert. About 2 hours into my hike, I saw the first one. Broken branches, thick ones, arranged in a perfect arrow shape on the ground. They were pointing deeper into the forest, away from the trail. I stopped and stared at them for a solid minute. Branches don't fall like that naturally. Someone had placed them there. But who? I hadn't seen another soul since I started. I took a photo and kept walking, but my mind was already working overtime. Was it a trail marker? A prank? Some kind of geocaching thing? Then I found the stones. A circle of smooth river rocks, maybe 10 of them, laid out in a perfect ring right in the middle of the path. No moss on top, which meant they'd been placed recently. Inside the circle were 3 red berries, arranged in a triangle. I crouched down and touched one, still fresh, not dried out. That's when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't random. Someone was leaving signs. But why? I should have turned back right then. I know that now. Instead, I pulled out my GPS to mark the location. The screen flickered. Then it went dark. I pressed the power button. Nothing. The battery had been at 74% that morning. I'd charged it fully the night before. There was no reason for it to be dead. I tried my phone next. Same thing, completely drained. Come on, I muttered, shaking both devices like that would somehow help. My compass was in the side pocket of my pack, so I pulled it out. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle on north. It just rotated in slow, lazy circles, like it couldn't decide where magnetic north actually was. I felt the first real thread of unease curl in my stomach. I'd been hiking for years. I'd dealt with dead batteries, broken gear, bad weather. But this was different. Everything was failing at once, and I couldn't explain why. I stood there on that empty trail, surrounded by silence, holding a useless compass, and for the first time I wondered if I was actually alone out here. I kept hiking. What else was I supposed to do? Over the next 3 hours, I found 4 more arrow formations, 2 more stone circles, and once, I found a small pile of pine cones stacked in a pyramid, sitting on a flat rock like an offering. someone was tracking me, or guiding me. I didn't know which, and that uncertainty made my chest tight. By the time I stopped to make camp that evening, my hands were shaking, not from cold, from adrenaline. I set up my tent in a small clearing, started a fire, and sat there staring into the flames, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew. Something was out there, and it knew exactly where I was. I didn't sleep that first night. Not really. I lay in my tent with my headlamp off, listening. The fire had died down to embers, and the darkness pressed in from all sides. Every sound felt amplified. The rustle of leaves, the creak of branches, the occasional crack of a twig somewhere in the trees. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, circling my campsite in a wide arc, maybe 30 feet out. Not the quick, skittering steps of a deer or the padding of a bear. These were slow, measured, bipedal. Something walking on two legs. I held my breath and listened. The steps moved from my left to my right, then behind my tent, then back around to the front. A complete circle. Then they stopped. Silence. I waited, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. 1 minute. 2. Nothing. Then I heard it. A low, guttural sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a voice. It was deep, resonant, and it came from directly in front of my tent. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, then cut off abruptly. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just lay there frozen, gripping my knife with sweaty hands. Whatever was out there didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard, and that terrified me more than anything else. The footsteps resumed, moving away this time, back into the forest.
I listened until I couldn't hear them anymore, until the only sound was the wind moving through the pines. I didn't sleep after that. I just waited for sunrise. When morning finally came, I crawled out of my tent, exhausted and wired. My body ached from lying tense for hours. I made coffee with shaking hands and tried to rationalize what I'd heard. Maybe it was a bear. Maybe the sounds echoed strangely in the mountains. Maybe I was just spooked and my mind had filled in the blanks. But then I saw the footprints. They were massive, easily twice the size of my own boot prints. Barefoot, 5 toes, clearly visible in the soft dirt near my fire pit. They circled my camp exactly where I'd heard the footsteps, and they were deep, pressed into the earth by something incredibly heavy. I crouched down and put my hand next to one of the prints. My fingers didn't even reach halfway across. That's when I noticed my camera. I'd left it on a rock near my tent to capture a time-lapse of the stars. The battery indicator had shown full when I set it up. Now it was completely dead, the screen blank. I popped open the battery compartment. The batteries were hot to the touch, like they'd been drained all at once. The same thing that killed my GPS and phone had done this. I sat back on my heels and stared at those footprints. Every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to pack up and hike back to the trailhead. This was wrong, all of it. The signs, the sounds, the footprints. Something was very deliberately making its presence known. But here's the thing nobody tells you about fear. Sometimes it flips. Sometimes it stops being a reason to run and becomes a reason to stay. I'd spent months feeling numb, disconnected, like I was sleepwalking through life. And now, for the first time in forever, I felt something. Curiosity. Raw, burning curiosity. I wanted to know what made those prints. I needed to know. So instead of packing up and leaving, like any sane person would, I did something incredibly stupid. I followed them. The tracks led away from my camp, deeper into the forest,
toward a steep ridgeline I hadn't planned to explore. They were fresh, made sometime during the night. Whoever or whatever had circled my tent had left a clear trail. I shouldered my pack and started walking. My hands were still shaking, but my mind was sharp, focused. I told myself I'd just follow for an hour, see where they led, then turn back. I didn't know then that turning back wouldn't be an option, that within a few hours, everything would fall apart. That I was walking straight towards something that would change everything I thought I knew about the world. But at that moment, standing at the edge of the unknown, I made my choice. I followed the footprints into the trees. The footprints led me off trail within the first 100 yards. I marked my path with small cairns, stacks of 3 rocks, so I could find my way back. That's what experienced hikers do. That's what I'd always done. But even as I placed each marker, some part of me knew I was lying to myself about coming back the same way. The tracks stayed clear for the first mile. Massive, deep impressions in the soft forest floor, moving with purpose through dense underbrush that I had to fight my way through. Whatever made these prints didn't need to duck under branches or navigate around thorns. It just walked straight through everything. I kept telling myself it was a bear, had to be a bear. But bears don't walk upright for this long, and their prints don't look like that. After about 90 minutes, I reached a steep embankment. The footprints went straight up it, and I had to scramble using roots and rocks as handholds. My pack felt heavier with every step, my legs burning from the climb. When I finally pulled myself over the top, breathing hard, I found myself in a narrow ravine I'd never seen on any map. The GPS was still dead, my compass still useless, and my phone, I'd stopped checking. What was the point? The ravine was maybe 40 feet wide, with steep walls on both sides covered in moss and ferns. A small stream ran down the middle, the water so clear I could see every pebble on the bottom. It was beautiful, isolated, the kind of place that felt untouched by human presence. And that's when I should have realized I wasn't supposed to be here. The footprints continued along the stream bank, and I followed, my boots squelching in the mud. The ravine curved ahead, and I couldn't see what was around the bend. The air felt different here, heavier, like the pressure changes before a storm. I stopped to drink some water and check my supplies. I had enough food for 3 more days, plenty of water purification tablets, my tent, my sleeping bag. I was fine. Physically, I was completely fine. But mentally, I was operating on pure adrenaline and something else, something I couldn't quite name. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing you shouldn't jump, but being unable to look away from the drop. The tracks turned sharper around the bend, and I followed. That's when I saw them. Fresh prints, so new that water was still seeping into the depressions. Made within the last few minutes. Whatever I was following was close, very close. My breath caught. I should have felt terror. Instead, I felt electric, alive. I kept walking, quieter now, placing each foot carefully. The stream babbled beside me, masking any sound I made. The ravine walls grew taller, closing in, and the light dimmed as the canopy overhead thickened. Then I saw something that made me freeze. A tree trunk, maybe 2 feet in diameter, snapped clean in half, about 7 feet off the ground. The break was fresh, white wood exposed, sap still sticky. It hadn't fallen naturally. Something had broken it. Something strong enough to snap hardwood like a twig. I reached out and touched the break, still warm. That's when I heard the sound again. That low, guttural vocalization I'd heard outside my tent. But this time it was closer, much closer. And it came from directly ahead, just beyond the next curve in the ravine. I froze, every muscle locked.
My brain screamed at me to turn around, to run, to get out of this ravine before whatever was up there decided I was a threat. But my feet didn't move, because mixed in with that sound was something else, something I couldn't quite process. It almost sounded like words, not English, not any language I recognized, but the rhythm, the cadence. It had structure, meaning, like someone trying to communicate. I stood there, gripping my water bottle, listening to something impossible try to speak. And then I made the second stupid decision of the day. I called out, "Hello?" My voice cracked, barely louder than a whisper. But in the silence of that ravine, it carried. Everything went quiet. The stream seemed to stop babbling. The wind died. Even the distant birds, the ones I'd finally started hearing again, went silent. I waited, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then, from around the bend, I heard footsteps, heavy, slow, coming toward me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just stood there as something massive rounded the corner and stepped into view. But I never got a clear look, because at that exact moment, my foot slipped on the wet rocks. I didn't even have time to yell. 1 second I was standing, the next I was falling backward, my arms flailing for purchase. My head cracked against something hard, and the world exploded into white light and pain. I felt myself hit the stream, the freezing water flooding over me. I tried to grab onto something, anything, but my pack was dragging me down and my vision was blurring and everything was spinning. The last thing I remember before the darkness took me was seeing a shape, huge and covered in dark fur, standing on the bank above me. And then, nothing. I woke up to pain, sharp, brutal pain that radiated from my left leg and made my vision swim with black spots. My head throbbed with every heartbeat, and when I tried to move, the world tilted sideways. I was lying on rocks, cold, wet rocks. The stream rushed past me, maybe 2 feet away, and I could hear it, but couldn't quite process where I was or how I'd gotten there. Then it came back. The ravine, the footprints, the shape standing above me. I jerked upright, or tried to. My legs screamed in protest, and I collapsed back down, gasping. When I looked down, I could see my left pants leg was torn and soaked with blood. My ankle was swollen to twice its normal size, already turning a deep purple-black. "Okay," I whispered to myself, my voice shaking. "Okay, okay, okay." I tried to assess the damage with trembling hands. Definitely sprained, possibly fractured. I couldn't put any weight on it. When I touched the back of my head, my fingers came away sticky with blood. The world kept tilting, which meant concussion, probably a bad one. I needed my pack, first aid kit, water purification, my emergency beacon. I looked around frantically, trying to orient myself. The stream had carried me maybe 30 yards downstream from where I'd fallen. The current wasn't strong, but with a heavy pack and a head injury, 30 yards might as well have been 30 miles. And my pack was gone. I felt panic rise in my throat like bile. I scanned the stream, the banks, anywhere it could have washed up. Nothing. The water must have swept it away, probably snagged it on something downstream, or pulled it into a deeper pool where I couldn't see it. Everything was in that pack. Everything. Food, shelter, fire-starting equipment, my emergency beacon, my first aid supplies. Without it, I had nothing except the clothes on my back, my useless phone in my pocket, and a knife on my belt. The sun was already starting to sink toward the horizon. I had maybe 3 hours of daylight left. I tried to stand, using a nearby tree for support, but the moment I put pressure on my left leg, white-hot agony shot through me, and I crumpled. I couldn't walk, could barely crawl. That's when the reality of my situation finally hit me. I was alone, in an unmapped ravine with a head injury and a destroyed leg.
No one knew where I was. I'd deliberately chosen a trail with no foot traffic. My GPS was dead. My phone was dead. And even if they worked, there was no signal out here. No one was coming to help me. I sat there on those rocks, shivering as the adrenaline wore off and shock began to set in. And I realized I might actually die here. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt strangely calm, detached, like I was watching this happen to someone else. I needed to move, needed to find shelter before dark. The temperature was already dropping, and my wet clothes were leaching heat from my body. Hypothermia would kill me faster than the leg injury. I started crawling, dragging myself along the stream bank using my arms, my useless leg trailing behind me. Every few feet I had to stop and rest, panting, fighting the nausea that kept rising in waves. The concussion was getting worse. I don't know how long I crawled. Could have been 20 minutes. Could have been an hour. Time felt strange, elastic. But eventually I found a small overhang in the ravine wall, barely big enough to shelter under, but it was something. I collapsed beneath it, my whole body shaking. My teeth were chattering so hard I thought they might crack. That's when I started to cry. Not from pain, though the pain was excruciating, but from the sheer, overwhelming weight of how badly I'd screwed up. I'd followed footprints into the wilderness like an idiot. I'd ignored every warning sign, and now I was going to pay for it. I thought about my sister, about how she'd probably be the one to report me missing when I didn't show up for our monthly phone call. I thought about the search teams that would eventually come looking, how they'd probably never find me in this ravine. I thought about those massive footprints and wondered if whatever made them was still out there, watching. The sun sank lower, the shadows grew longer, and I lay there under that overhang, fading in and out of consciousness, waiting for the darkness to take me. But then I smelled smoke. Wood smoke, sharp and clean, cutting through the smell of wet earth and blood. I forced my eyes open. My vision was blurry, doubled, but I could see it. Maybe 20 feet away, a small fire burning in a ring of stones. That fire hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. And standing beside it, barely visible in the dying light, was a shape. Massive, dark, covered in fur. It was watching me. I tried to speak, to call out, but my voice wouldn't work. My body wouldn't respond. The concussion was pulling me under, and I couldn't fight it anymore. The last thing I heard before I lost consciousness was a voice. Deep, rough, but unmistakably words. Stay. And then, safe. I woke up warm. That was the first shock. I should have been freezing, dying of hypothermia, shaking myself apart. But I was warm, almost comfortable. The second shock was the fire. It was closer now, maybe 5 feet away, built up into a proper campfire with a neat stack of wood beside it. The flames cast dancing shadows across the ravine walls. The third shock was that I wasn't alone. It sat across the fire from me, massive and utterly still. In the firelight, I could finally see it clearly, and my brain struggled to process what my eyes were showing me. 8 feet tall, easily, maybe more. Covered head to toe in dark brown fur that looked almost black in the shadows. Broad shoulders, arms thick as tree trunks, hands that could probably crush my skull like an eggshell. But the face, God, the face was what got me. It wasn't animal. The features were too human. The eyes especially, deep-set, intelligent, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not hostile, not friendly either, just observing.
We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. I should have been screaming, should have been trying to run, to fight, something. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My body was locked in place, whether from injury or pure shock, I didn't know. Then it spoke. Awake. The voice was impossibly deep, resonating in my chest like a bass drum. The word was clear but rough, like speaking was difficult. Like the mouth wasn't quite designed for human language. I made a sound, not a word, just a strangled noise of pure disbelief. The creature shifted slightly, and I flinched. It noticed and went still again, waiting. What? My voice cracked. I swallowed and tried again. What are you? It didn't answer right away. Instead, it reached beside itself and picked something up. My water bottle, the one from my pack. It held the bottle carefully, almost delicately, between two fingers and extended it toward me. Drink, it said. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the bottle, but I managed to unscrew the cap and take a sip. The water was cold, clean. I drank half of it before I could stop myself. Thank you, I whispered automatically. The creature made a sound, not quite a grunt, not quite a word. It pulled its arm back and settled again. We sat in silence. The fire crackled. My leg throbbed. My head pounded. And across from me, something that wasn't supposed to exist watched me with ancient, knowing eyes. You're real, I said, more to myself than to it. You're actually real. Real. It repeated the word like it was testing the taste of it. Do you have a name? Another long pause, then, Clay. Clay. It had a name. This impossible creature sitting across from me. This thing that every rational part of my brain said couldn't exist, had a name. I'm Ethan, I said, because what else do you say when you're introducing yourself to Bigfoot? Ethan. Clay nodded slightly, like he was committing it to memory. I had about 1,000 questions fighting to get out. Where did he come from? How many others were there? Why could he speak English? But what came out was, Did you build this fire? Yes. Why? Clay tilted his head slightly, considering. When he spoke again, he used more words, though they came slowly, carefully chosen. You fell. Cold. Dying. He gestured at my leg. Hurt. You saved me. It wasn't a question. He didn't respond, just watched me with those unsettling eyes. I looked down at my leg. Someone had bound it, not with bandages, I didn't have any, but with strips of bark and moss, wrapped tight to immobilize the joint. It was crude but effective, and my head wound had been cleaned. I could feel it, no longer sticky with blood. You did this? I touched the bark binding. Yes. The reality of it crashed over me. This creature, this Bigfoot, this thing from campfire stories and blurry photographs, had found me dying and chose to help me. Had built a fire, treated my wounds, and sat guard while I was unconscious. Why? I asked again, my voice breaking. Clay was quiet for a long moment. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. People come, he finally said. Many people. Lost. Hurt. Ground. Breaks. He made a gesture I didn't understand, something like his hands crumbling apart. The ground breaks? Yes. Not safe. Never safe here. He looked around the ravine, and for the first time I saw something in his expression. Concern. Maybe even fear. We watch. We try. Help. We? My heart rate picked up. There are more of you?
Family, Clay said simply. I tried to wrap my head around it.
A family of Bigfoot living in these mountains, watching over lost hikers. It sounded insane. It was insane. The signs, I said suddenly, remembering. The arrows made of branches, the stone circles. That was you? Warning people? Clay nodded. Warnings. Most people turn back. You. He made that not quite grunt sound again. You followed. I'm an idiot, I muttered. Curious, Clay corrected. And I could have sworn there was something almost like amusement in his voice. The wind picked up, making the fire dance. I shivered despite the warmth, and Clay immediately added more wood to the flames. How long have I been unconscious? I asked. Clay held up one massive hand, showing 4 fingers. 4 hours? He nodded. 4 hours. It was full dark now, the ravine walls disappearing into shadow beyond the firelight. Somewhere out there was my pack, my supplies, my only way of signaling for help. My pack, I said. Did you find it? Clay shook his head. Water took it. Gone. Gone. Of course it was gone. So I'm stuck here. It wasn't a question. With my leg destroyed and no supplies, I couldn't make it back to the trailhead. Couldn't even make it 100 yards. Stay, Clay said, the same word he'd used before I passed out. Storm coming. Big storm. Not safe to move. How do you know there's a storm coming? He tapped the side of his head, then pointed at the sky. Feel it. Smell it. And that's when I noticed the clouds rolling in, thick and dark, blotting out the stars. The air pressure had dropped. The temperature was falling fast. When? I asked. Tonight. Soon. I looked at my useless leg, at the fire that was the only thing keeping me alive, at the creature who had every reason to leave me here but hadn't. What happens when the storm comes? Clay met my eyes, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. Ground breaks, he said quietly. People fall, disappear, gone. He meant it literally, I realized. The ground would collapse, sinkholes, landslides. Is that what happened to the others? The question came out before I could stop it. The other missing hikers? Clay's expression shifted into something that might have been sorrow. Yes, he said. We try to save them. Sometimes, too late. The wind started picking up around an hour after I woke. At first, it was just a whisper through the trees, but within minutes, it built to a howl that made the ravine walls act like a wind tunnel. Clay stood up, and seeing him at full height made my stomach drop. He was enormous, easily 8.5 feet tall, maybe more. His head nearly touched the overhang above us. Need to move, he said, his deep voice cutting through the wind. Not safe here. I can't walk, I said, gesturing helplessly at my leg. Clay looked at me for a moment, then crouched down and turned his back to me. Hold on. It took me a second to understand what he was offering. He wanted to carry me. Are you sure? I'm not exactly light. He made that huffing sound again, and I realized he was laughing. At my weight. This creature could probably carry a full-grown deer without breaking a sweat. I hesitated, then wrapped my arms around his neck. His fur was coarse but warm, and the muscles beneath it were like steel cables. He stood up smoothly, adjusting me on his back like I weighed nothing, and started moving. The ride was surprisingly gentle. Clay moved through the ravine with absolute confidence, never stumbling, never hesitating, even as the wind screamed around us. He seemed to know every rock, every root, every safe place to step. "Where are we going?" I shouted over the wind. "Safe place. Cave." I wanted to ask more, but the first drops of rain started falling. Within seconds, it became a downpour, ice cold and relentless. Clay hunched forward, sheltering me as best he could, and picked up his pace. Through the rain and darkness, I saw other shapes moving.
large shapes, keeping pace with us through the trees. My breath caught. "Your family?" "Yes," Clay said. "They help." I counted at least 3 others, maybe 4. They moved like shadows, barely visible even when lightning flashed overhead. But I could feel them, a presence in the darkness, watching, protecting. We climbed. The ravine grew steeper, the rocks more treacherous, but Clay never faltered. My head was pounding again, my vision swimming, but I held on. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, Clay ducked under a low rock formation, and suddenly we were inside. The cave was bigger than I expected, maybe 15 feet deep and 10 feet wide. Dry, protected from the wind, and already prepared with a small fire burning in a ring of stones near the entrance. Clay set me down gently against the back wall, and I gasped as pain shot through my leg. One of the other shapes entered the cave, another Bigfoot, slightly smaller than Clay, with lighter brown fur. It carried an armful of dry moss and what looked like edible plants. "My sister," Clay said, gesturing. "River." River made a low sound, not quite a greeting, not quite words, and set the plants down beside me. She studied me for a moment with dark, intelligent eyes, then made a series of gestures to Clay. "She asks if you eat plants," Clay translated. "Yes," I managed. "Thank you." River nodded and retreated to the cave entrance, standing guard. 2 more shapes appeared, one massive, even bigger than Clay, and one smaller, younger looking. Clay gestured to each in turn. "Father, Stone, brother, Ash." I was meeting a Bigfoot family. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh, but the sound that came out was closer to a sob. Stone, the father, made a deep rumbling sound and gestured outside. Clay listened, then turned to me. "Storm is bad, very bad. Ground already breaking." As if to emphasize his point, a massive crack of thunder shook the cave, followed immediately by a sound I'll never forget. A deep, grinding roar, like the earth itself was tearing apart. "Landslide," Clay said grimly. "Close." The younger one, Ash, made an agitated sound and gestured rapidly. Clay's expression darkened. "What is it?" I asked. Clay looked at me, and I saw genuine worry in his eyes. "The trail you came from. Gone. Collapsed into ravine." My heart stopped. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "The ground. Unstable here. Always unstable. Rain makes it worse." Clay moved to the cave entrance and pointed out into the storm. Even through the rain, I could see it. Massive sections of the hillside simply weren't there anymore. Where there had been solid ground was now empty space, rocks and trees tumbling into darkness. "This happens often?" My voice was barely a whisper. "Yes. Every big storm, sometimes no storm, just happens. Ground is broken underneath, hollow, weak." I thought about all those stone circles, those arrow formations. "You've been trying to warn people." "For many years," Clay said. "But people don't listen. They see signs, think it's game, or prank. They keep going." "How many?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "How many people have gone missing here?" Clay exchanged a look with Stone. The older Bigfoot held up both hands, fingers spread, then closed them and opened them again. Then again. 30. At least 30 people over the years. "We save some," Clay continued quietly. "Guide them out. They never see us. We stay hidden. But some," he trailed off, looking out at the storm. "Some fall before we reach them, or panic, run wrong way. Ground opens and they're gone." The cave fell silent except for the howling wind and the drumming rain. I sat there, processing what he was telling me. This wasn't about Bigfoot hiding from humans.
This was about Bigfoot trying to protect humans from something they didn't understand. Unstable ground, sinkholes, underground voids that could swallow a person without warning. "Why?" I finally asked. "Why do you help us? We destroy your forests. We hunt you. You're people," Clay interrupted simply. "We're people. People help people." The simplicity of it stunned me into silence. River made a sharp sound from the entrance, and suddenly all three of the others were on alert. Stone moved to stand beside her, peering out into the storm. "What's wrong?" I asked. Clay held up a hand, listening. Then I heard it too, that grinding, tearing sound, but closer now, much closer. "The ridge," Clay said, his voice tight. "Above us, breaking." Before I could respond, the world exploded with sound and motion. A massive section of the hillside above the cave gave way, sending tons of rock and mud sliding down. The entrance of the cave suddenly filled with debris, and for a terrifying moment, I thought we'd be buried alive. But the cave held. The rock formation above us was solid, and the landslide flowed around it like water around a stone, filling the ravine below with destruction. When the noise finally stopped, I realized I was holding my breath. I let it out in a shaky gasp. Clay moved to the entrance, or where the entrance had been. It was partially blocked now, narrowed to maybe 3 feet wide. He looked out at the devastation, then back at me. "If you were in camp," he said quietly, "you would be dead." I stared at him, the full weight of it hitting me. If Clay hadn't found me, hadn't moved me to this cave, I would have been swept away by that landslide, buried under tons of rock and mud. "You saved my life," I whispered. "Not first time," Clay said, then quieter. "Maybe not last." Outside, the storm raged on, and the mountain continued to tear itself apart. The storm didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. I lost track of time in that cave. Could have been hours, could have been days. The darkness outside was absolute, broken only by lightning that turned the world white for split seconds before plunging it back into black. Clay and his family took turns keeping watch at the cave entrance. They didn't sleep. At least, I never saw them sleep. They just sat there, alert, listening to the mountain destroy itself. I dozed in fits and starts, my head throbbing, my legs screaming every time I shifted position. River brought me water from somewhere deeper in the cave, a spring maybe, and more of those plants. They tasted bitter, but I ate them anyway. During one of my more lucid moments, I watched Stone making marks on the cave wall with a piece of charcoal. Not random scratches, deliberate symbols. "What's he doing?" I asked Clay. Clay glanced at his father, then back at me. "Marking. Recording." "Recording what?" "Collapses. Where ground broke. When?" Clay gestured at the wall, and I saw it was covered in marks. Years of marks, maybe decades. "We track patterns, try to predict." I stared at the wall, my mind racing. "You've been studying this, the geological instability." "Don't know those words," Clay said. "But yes, we watch, learn, understand where safe, where dangerous." "How long have you been doing this?" Clay was quiet for a moment. Then, "My grandfather's grandfather started. Maybe before." Generations. They'd been tracking this for generations, trying to understand why their home kept trying to kill them and the humans who wandered into it. Another massive crack echoed through the ravine, followed by that now familiar grinding roar. Ash made an alarmed sound and pointed outside. Clay moved to the entrance and looked out. Even from where I sat, I could see his shoulders tense. "What is it?" I asked. "Ridge across from us, coming down." I watched in horror
as an entire section of the opposite ravine wall simply collapsed, sliding into the darkness below. Trees that had probably stood for centuries disappeared in seconds, swallowed by the earth. Jesus, I breathed. Worst storm in many seasons, Stone rumbled, his voice even deeper than Clay's. He spoke slowly, with effort, like English was harder for him. Ground already weak, now breaking everywhere. How do you know it's weak? I asked. Stone tapped his foot on the cave floor, then made a series of gestures I didn't understand. Clay translated. He feels it. Vibrations. Sound changes when ground is hollow underneath, like drum with no bottom. Seismic activity, I said, half to myself. There must be a whole network of voids and caves under this area. Limestone, maybe. Or old mining tunnels. Clay looked at me sharply. Mining? People digging underground, taking rock, a long time ago. Clay and Stone exchanged a look, something passing between them. We found places, Clay said slowly, deep in mountain, old places, broken, made by people with tools. Abandoned mines, of course. The Blue Ridge had a history of small mining operations in the 1800s, most of them poorly documented, many of them simply left to collapse when the veins ran out. That's why the ground keeps failing, I said, the pieces clicking together. The old mine shafts are collapsing, creating voids, and the surface above them is unstable. Every heavy rain, every freeze-thaw cycle, it gets worse. Yes, Stone said, nodding heavily. Gets worse. Every year, more breaks. I thought about all those missing hikers. The official reports probably blamed exposure, wild animals, getting lost. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. The ground had literally opened up and swallowed them. The authorities need to know about this, I said. They need to close this area, or at least warn people. They know, Clay interrupted. I blinked. What? People in uniforms, with papers and tools. They come sometimes, look at ground, talk, then leave. Nothing changes. Rangers, I said. Geological surveys. They know ground is bad, Clay continued, but they don't know how bad. They don't see what we see, don't feel what we feel. He gestured at the storm outside. And they don't stay when mountain breaks. He was right. Official surveys would only scratch the surface, literally. They couldn't see the full extent of the instability without advanced equipment, extensive drilling, years of study. And even if they knew, bureaucracy moved slowly. Warning signs would take months. Trail closures would require environmental impact studies. People would keep coming. People would keep disappearing. River made a sharp chirping sound and pointed. Another section of hillside was sliding away, this one taking what looked like part of the trail system with it. Your path back, Clay said quietly. Gone now. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. All of it? Yes. No safe way out until storm stops. Ground settles. How long? Clay looked at Stone, who held up 3 fingers. 3 days? Stone nodded. 3 days, trapped in this cave with a Bigfoot family, while the mountain collapsed around us. 3 days before I could even attempt to get out. If there was anything left to get out to. Ash suddenly made an urgent sound, and everyone's attention snapped to the cave entrance. The younger Bigfoot was pointing at something in the darkness, his body tense. What is it? I asked, but Clay held up a hand for silence. They all stood frozen, listening. I strained my ears, but heard nothing except the storm and the occasional rumble of shifting earth. Then I felt it, a vibration through the cave floor. Subtle at first, then stronger. Not the grinding of a landslide, something else, something deeper. Stone made a low, urgent sound and moved toward the back of the cave. What's happening?
I asked, fear creeping into my voice. Clay turned to me, and for the first time, I saw something close to fear in his eyes. "Big break coming," he said. "Very big. This cave, not safe anymore." "What? Where do we go?" "Deeper," Clay said, already moving toward me. "There's another cave, older, stronger, but harder to reach." He lifted me onto his back again, and I wrapped my arms around his neck, my heart hammering. River grabbed the firestones and the supplies. Stone led the way toward the back of the cave, where I hadn't noticed an opening. A narrow crack in the rock, barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. The vibration was getting stronger. Pebbles were falling from the cave ceiling. "Go, go," Clay urged, and Stone disappeared into the crack. River went next, then Ash. Clay adjusted his grip on me and started to follow. That's when I heard it. A sound like thunder, but continuous, growing louder. The entire mountain was moving. Clay lunged through the opening, just as the cave behind us collapsed with a deafening roar. Rocks the size of cars tumbled down, filling the space where we'd been seconds before. We were in complete darkness now, moving through a passage so narrow that Clay had to turn sideways, his breathing labored. I could feel the walls pressing in on both sides. The rumbling was everywhere, above and below, and all around. I couldn't tell if we were moving deeper into the mountain, or if the mountain was collapsing on top of us. All I could do was hold on and pray that Clay knew where he was going, and hope that wherever we were going would be strong enough to survive what was coming. The deeper cave was older than anything I'd ever seen. Stone walls worn smooth by water that hadn't flowed in centuries. Formations that took thousands of years to form. And silence, complete, absolute silence, once the rumbling finally stopped. We stayed there for 3 days. Clay's family brought me food and water from sources I couldn't identify. They kept me warm. They checked my leg, rebinding it when the swelling went down. And slowly, carefully, Clay told me more about how his people had lived in these mountains for longer than they could count. How they'd watched humans come and go, building and destroying, never understanding the land they walked on. How they'd tried to help, tried to warn, but humans either couldn't see the signs or chose to ignore them. "We are good at hiding," Clay said on the second night. "Too good. People don't believe. Easier to think we're stories." "Why tell me this?" I asked. "Why trust me?" Clay looked at me for a long moment. "Because you followed. Because you're curious. Because..." He paused, searching for words. "Because you'll understand, maybe. And maybe understanding is how things change." On the morning of the 4th day, the rain finally stopped. Stone checked the passages, and after what felt like hours, he returned and nodded. Safe to move. Getting me out was harder than getting me in. My leg was healing, but still couldn't bear weight. Clay carried me for hours through passages and ravines I'd never be able to find again, taking a route that avoided every unstable section, every weak point in the mountain. Finally, we emerged onto solid ground about 2 miles from where the official trail system began. Clay set me down carefully and pointed. "Follow ridge. Stay on rock, not soil. 2 hours walk. You'll find people." "What about you?" "We go back. This is our home." I looked at him, this impossible creature who'd saved my life, who'd shown me a truth nobody would believe, and I felt my throat tighten. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." Clay nodded once. Then he said something that's haunted me ever since. "People don't listen," he said quietly.
They see warning signs. They ignore. They fall. They disappear. He looked directly into my eyes. Maybe you make them listen. Before I could respond, he turned and melted into the forest. Within seconds, it was like he'd never been there at all.
I sat there for a while, processing everything, before I started the slow, agonizing crawl towards civilization. A ranger found me 6 hours later, dehydrated and delirious. They airlifted me out, got me to a hospital. Fractured ankle, severe concussion, exposure, dehydration. I spent a week in the hospital answering questions. I told them I fell, got separated from my pack, found a cave and waited out the storm. Nobody asked too many questions. They were just glad I'd survived. I never mentioned Clay, never mentioned what I'd seen. Who would believe me? I spent the first month after my rescue trying to convince myself it had been a hallucination. The concussion, the dehydration, my brain filling in gaps with impossible explanations. But then I started researching. I requested records from the National Park Service, missing persons reports, search and rescue operations in that area over the past 20 years. 14 people, 14 confirmed missing hikers in that specific region. Some of the cases were still open. Most had been closed with the assumption that the person had gotten lost, succumbed to exposure, or been killed by wildlife. But I read the reports more carefully, and I saw patterns nobody else had connected. Every disappearance happened during or right after heavy rain. Every single one. Several search teams reported finding areas where the trail had recently collapsed or showed signs of ground instability. One report mentioned finding a hiker's pack in a ravine, but no body. Another described unusual rockfall patterns inconsistent with natural erosion. The mountain had been swallowing people for decades, and nobody had put it together. I tried to report what I knew. The unstable ground, the old mine shafts, the systematic failures happening in that area. I called the Park Service. I filed reports. I even contacted a geological survey team. They thanked me for my concern and told me they'd look into it. Nothing changed. The trails stayed open. People kept hiking there. And I realized Clay was right. People don't listen. But here's what really keeps me up at night, and this is why I'm finally sharing this story. I went back last month. Not to hike. I can't do that anymore, not with my leg, but just to check. To see if maybe, just maybe, someone had finally done something. The warning signs Clay's family had left were gone, every single one. The stone circles, the branch arrows, all of it, cleared away by rangers who probably thought they were litter. New trail markers had been installed, freshly painted signs encouraging people to explore the backcountry and discover hidden gems. They're actively directing people into the most dangerous area. And I can't do anything about it, because the moment I mention how I know it's dangerous, I lose all credibility. Nobody's going to believe the guy who claims Bigfoot saved him from a landslide. So I'm putting this out there, on the internet, where at least it'll exist. Where maybe someone planning to hike Raven's Notch will find it and think twice. If you've made it this far, if you're still watching, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Not for me, but because maybe, just maybe, if enough people hear this story, someone with actual authority will pay attention. Drop a comment if you've ever experienced anything similar, any unexplained warnings in the wilderness that you ignored or heeded. Sometimes the truth needs a crowd before anyone takes it seriously. Because here's the thing that truly shocks me, that keeps me awake at 2 in the morning. Bigfoot wasn't hiding from us. Bigfoot was protecting us from a danger we created and then forgot about. From collapsing mine shafts and unstable ground that we're too arrogant or too busy to properly map and mark. From our own ignorance. And they've been doing it for generations, watching over us, trying to guide us away from danger. knowing that if they ever showed themselves, we'd hunt them, study them, destroy the very anonymity that lets them help. Clay saved my life. His family saved my life. And they've probably saved dozens of others who never knew they were in danger. I still hike those mountains. I still live near the forest. But now I pay attention to the signs, all of them. The official ones and the unofficial ones. The stone circles that occasionally reappear despite the ranger's best efforts. The way certain trails seem subtly blocked, like something doesn't want you going that way. And sometimes, late at night when I'm camping, I hear footsteps circling my tent. Heavy, measured, deliberate. And I don't feel afraid anymore. I whisper, "Thank you," into the darkness. And I swear sometimes I hear a response. A deep voice, barely audible over the wind. Safe.